Hey folks, this is Kelani. I hope you're all excited to sink your teeth into some actual content when the next reset rolls around. Hopefully all of the server issues have been patched up by then. I heard some EU servers were pretty much burning down, but there's a few days to put the fires out and get everything ship-shape ready for Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll be able to finally progress through the Teldrassil storylines and just experience something new. But until then, why don't we kill a little bit of time by looking over the ranged DPS specs as we head into battle for Azeroth. Now it's going to be a little harder to rank ranged based upon just their DPS because most numbers are likely going to change as we progress through the leveling process of BFA, and there's usually a tuning pass or two within the first week of the raids releasing. So we're going to focus more on their playstyle, what types of encounters each spec is good at, and where their strengths and weaknesses lie. Let's see where everyone stands when compared against each other. Let's kick things off with Hunters, because that's what I've played for the longest time, pretty much ever since I moved over to North America servers. We only have two specs to look at because Survival is still sticking with the melee camp. Damn traders, but Marksmanship and Beast Mastery are both changing quite a bit. Marksmanship a little bit more. Instead of the vulnerable windows which you would have been used to in Legion, we're back to a simpler playstyle which boils down to using aimed shot to empower your arcane shots and multi-shots, firing off rapid fire to regen focus and deal quite a bit of damage, and when there's nothing else to do, use steady shot to generate focus and arcane shot to make sure you don't hit the focus cap. Seems pretty easy and it plays quite smoothly. I definitely prefer this rotation over the Legion Marksmanship. There's very little RNG involved and you can plan for your next few abilities. Marksmanship has some great burst potential too, especially when you add in some talents to the mix. The double tap talent causes your next aim shot to fire an additional aim shot for free. Combo that with the chance to deal extra damage when a target is above 80% health, and it's not that uncommon to one-shot monsters while questing. But the spec does seem to fall a little short as time goes on. Their burst may be great, but their sustained damage could be a lot better. That might change as numbers are tuned, but it seems more to do with how their kit is very front-loaded. The same goes for AoE damage, some very high burst potential, but sustaining the damage is more problematic. The other major weakness that Marksmanship Hunters will have, and have almost always had, is that they do best when they can stand still, which isn't really all that likely most of the time. Any periods of extended movement will cost you DPS, and there isn't really much you can do about it. Positioning and movement will be key. If you mess up a few times, your DPS is going to tank. Currently, Marksmanship Hunters should do okay on single target encounters, and very well on large AoE packs. As for Beast Mastery, well, that's an entirely different story. BM Hunters will find themselves once again one of the easiest ranged DPS to play very well, partly because they have zero restrictions when it comes to movement. You can happily run around, spin around, jump around. Nothing can stop you from unloading your kill commands and cobra shots into the enemy's face. Providing you're facing the right direction, of course, but just because they're relatively easy to pick up and play, that doesn't mean they won't be rocking the damage meters. Right now, Beast Mastery seems to be in a better spot when compared to Marksmanship, but again, numbers can always change. Beast Mastery has strong single target damage and strong AoE damage with multi-shot and beast cleave. If you pick up Chimera Shot, you can also benefit from 2 target encounters, as long as the enemies are relatively stacked up. So Beast Mastery should do well in most encounter types. They're going to be a pretty safe pick whether you're wanting to push Mythic raid content or just stick to Mythic plus keys. The weaknesses of Beast Mastery lie in their reliance on their pet. If your pet bugs out at all in an encounter or decides to just get himself stuck in a wall or what have you, you just can't do any meaningful damage. The same can be said of target switching. If you have to swap to a target which is very far away, you have to wait for your pet to close the distance before your damage picks up again. Thankfully, you only have one pet to look out for now. Beast Mastery will definitely be a top pick for ranged DPS, just remember that all of the ranged DPS jobs will probably go to you. Let's move on to a ranged DPS powerhouse, the Mages. Mages haven't actually changed that much overall going from Legion to Battle for Azeroth, only ARCANE has seen any number of significant changes, so let's start with that. ARCANE has always been the spec that needed a little bit of time and gear to get going, but when they reached that point they usually start melting faces. The end of Warlords of Draenor was an extreme example, which we probably won't see again, but the crazy burst potential is always there, and that's just how ARCANE Mages work. They go through their burst window with all of their cooldowns available, and then they just kind of recharge, conserving mana until they can go crazy again. As you can imagine, that means they have very strong burst damage both in single target encounters and AoE encounters. You can play around with your talents to focus more on single target or AoE, but they're currently doing pretty well in both situations. However, the majority of their damage will always be in their burn phase. Outside of cooldowns, you're not going to see anywhere near the same kind of damage. That also means if you ever have to move during your burn phase, or you mess it up for whatever reason, your DPS will drop significantly and there's not much you can do to bring it back. Arcane also doesn't really benefit from 2-target fights all that much, so it's a bit of an either or case. Single target or AoE. Anything in the middle gets a little iffy. The problem that Arcane has always had is the way it plays isn't the most engaging or fun for a lot of people. Lots of Arcane blast spam and you actually have to manage your mana, something no other spec has to deal with now. If you don't find it fun, it's going to be hard committing to it with Fire and Frost on offer, especially if they're both doing better DPS. Fire is playing pretty much the same as it did throughout Legion. You cram as much damage into your combustion window as magically possible and just keep firing off your fireballs and pyros until combustion comes back so you can set yourself on fire again. It's a wonderful cycle and isn't all too different from Arcane, with the exception of some very cool procs. So obviously the first major proc is Hot Streak, which you'll build up with Fireball and trigger it with Fire Blast to fire off some awesome instant pyroblasts, which is always super satisfying. The other procs that you can get come from the Pyroclasm talent, which gives your next non-instant pyroblast some extra firepower. You'll find Fire Mage is very fast paced during your combustion, but tends to slow down outside of that, especially if you get quite a few Pyroclasm procs. Hard casting a pyroblast takes a long time after all. Fire has some really interesting ebb and flow due to these interactions, and I find it quite a lot of fun. It's got enough firepower to stand on its own in single target encounters, but really shines when you have a few targets stacked up. When Ignite gets to spread, then you're really having fun. Fire can really shine in AoE situations too, if you play around with your talents and tailor your kit specifically for AoE. The main weaknesses of Fire crop up when you have targets that are spread out. If targets aren't stacked up enough for Ignite to spread and your AoEs can't hit them, you're stuck to your single target rotation. Another problem that Fire Mages sometimes run into is that you can't control Ignite spreading and dealing damage. If you ever have to stop damage on a target for any reason, you're sort of screwed. Interestingly, Fire Mages have had 2 of their strongest legendary effects converted into talents, which should make them a force to be reckoned with on the DPS meters. I think Fire is going to be in a great place for those who enjoy it. The last mage spec is Frost, which again is playing very similar to how it was in Legion. The only thing missing is Ebonbolt, which you can pick up as a talent anyways. They're going to excel in the same ways as they did during Legion: strong single target damage and amazing cleave when you have a second target present. Past 2 targets you don't really benefit all that much, and Frost Mage doesn't have the best AoE damage unless you get some really crazy big packs. But even if Blizzard only tickles a little bit, it's one heck of a slowing effect. Frost Mages are going to be a tank's best friend when it comes to Mythic Plus. Being able to slow entire packs and place Blizzard exactly where you want it will probably make it one of the strongest slows available. Combine that with their awesome mobility thanks to Shimmer or Blink and you have a wonderful recipe for a kiting god. If there's ever any kiting to be done, you're probably going to get that job. Frost Mages are also very proc reliant, which can be a good and a bad thing. When you get those procs, it's pretty fun slinging off your destructive ice lances and flurries, but if you don't get those procs, then you're stuck chain casting Frostbolt. Not the most exciting thing in the world, and Frost has been shunned in the past for being quite boring to play. These procs do allow you to deal quite high amounts of damage if you save them for specific targets though. That makes Frost Mages really good at sniping off small ads that need to die quickly, but outside of those procs you don't really have much oomph, which also affects your burst potential. I think Frost will be in a great place overall for single target and cleave fights, as well as a sure pickup in Mythic Plus groups. Let's move on to the other caster which everyone usually has their eyes on, the Warlocks. Warlocks bring a whole bunch of great utility to any group, including their get in any group for free card, the Summoning Stone. Let's have a look at Affliction first. It's going to play very similar to Legion with a few minor differences. Obviously everything from the artifact that was fun and unique has gone down the drain. I'll miss you, Soul Flame. That leaves you with pretty much just the base damage over time spells and Shadow Ball in the place of Drained Soul, Corruption, Agony, Unstable Affliction, and whatever else you decide to pick up in your talent section. Honestly, I think Affliction hasn't changed enough to really change how and where it's going to be effective. If you have multiple targets which aren't going to die immediately, Affliction should shine very well. As you face less and less targets, you'll lose potential damage. You're also quite reliant on RNG with Soul Shards. The only reliable source you have is via Agony damage, which is only a chance to generate a shard. That means you can have some serious dry spells, leaving you with very little to do. I don't think Affliction will be the go-to choice for single target encounters, at least at the start of the expansion. It's kind of frustrating to see Warlocks get whacked again and again by the nerf bat, but hopefully The numbers will come back around and all three specs will shine in their own right. Affliction also has quite a lot of ramp up time, so if you love burst damage and high numbers, this probably won't be the spec for you, but if you enjoy the damage over time playstyle, Affliction should offer you quite a lot of fun. I just wouldn't expect it to really excel until you get to council or heavy cleave fights. Thankfully, Affliction isn't restricted in the same way as some other specs are. You can cleave any number of targets no matter where they are in the room, as long as they're still in range of course. You can dot up 2 targets on opposite sides of the room and laugh at all of the frost mages who can't cleave with their ice lances. They're going to be great when they can spread their dots around, but outside of that I wouldn't expect Affliction to perform that well. Destruction is in a similar spot going into Battle for Azeroth. Not really enough has changed for the spec as a whole to change where it's going to be strong. Destruction will excel on any fights where 2 targets are present for extended periods of time. The way Havoc is designed means Destro will always be more powerful in 2 target encounters, or anywhere they can get good use out of Havoc. Sadly, that's also what Destruction Warlock will be balanced around 9 times out of 10, meaning your damage is going to suffer any time you can't make use of Havoc. Single target encounters aren't going to feel that great on Destro unless you have an ad or 2 during the fight, but they do have some good AoE potential. You have quite a few talents which can help you kick out some pretty decent damage when you have a lot of targets. As opposed to the other 2 specs, Demonology has changed quite a lot. Your entire kit is based around building up an army and empowering them using your demonic tyrant. It's a lot of fun watching your mini legion grow and grow, and then you can blow them up for some amazing burst AoE. While it looks really cool, blowing up your army might not be the best idea as it takes quite a little bit of time to build it up again, but it makes for some really fun imp fireworks. From what I've seen, it looks like Demonology will be focusing on trying to deal single target damage, as they don't really have many AoE choices outside of Implosion. I think Demonology is great fun to play, but their damage has been knocked down a few pegs recently, so if you're looking at playing Demo Warlock, I would cross your fingers that a few more tuning passes happen before now and BFA's release. Honestly, I would probably look at Warlock as a DPS package instead of 3 separate specs. Each has their own strengths, but they also cover each other's weaknesses. Demo for single target, Destro for 2 target, and anything past that, Affliction will take the cake. Chances are you're going to have a viable spec for any encounter, but you're going to have to learn each one to be able to swap around at the drop of a hat. If that's not something you're too keen on, some of the other classes might work out a bit better for you, but if you're happy to learn each Warlock spec, you shouldn't ever be in a bad position, Mythic Raid or Mythic Plus dungeons. One problem that Warlocks will have to work around no matter which spec you decide to pick up is their lack of mobility. There's a few tricks in there, but you're always going to be lagging behind the mages and hunters. Moving on to some classes which don't have all of their specs as ranged DPS, how about a Boomkin? It's been quite a rollercoaster for our little chicken friends throughout the beta. Losing their artifact punched quite a few large holes in their playstyle and the flow of their rotation, but thankfully a few things changed which filled in those gaps and made Boomkin even more fun to play. Right now they seem to be in a pretty good spot. They do decent enough single target damage, but they really start to shine when multiple targets are all stacked up. They can spread their dot effects, cleave everything with Lunar Strike, and start throwing out some crazy damage with Starfall. Your Wrath empowerments aren't wasted in cleave scenarios anymore either. While empowered, Wrath will also cause a little explosion around the target, so make good use of your empowerments as they come up. Empowerments are key to balanced Druid DPS, so if you manage them well you should do pretty well. But if you mismanage your empowerments, that's where you'll see a huge loss of DPS. It's basically just another resource to look after, so you have your astral power and your empowerments. You're going to have to keep an eye on both if you want to succeed as a Boomkin. I feel like the rotation of Balanced Druid is really smooth right now, and I'm excited to see how they do when everyone reaches max level. Thanks to quite a few of their abilities being instant cast, they can move around quite a bit more than some other casters too, so if mobility is something you're after, then Boomkins won't have to turret quite as much as mages or warlocks. They also have an AoE silence which can be put to very good use in several of the dungeons in BFA. The only issues you might run into with a Balanced Druid is your AoE and cleave is quite limited to stacked up groups. You can multi-dot enemies just like Affliction, but if your enemies are far away from each other, that's the extent of your cleaving potential. They also don't come equipped with any large cooldowns. Celestial Alignment will give you some extra damage, but you won't see the kind of burst that Destruction Warlocks or Fire Mages can put out. So it's more of a steady ride as a Balanced Druid, but it's a pleasant, steady ride. Let's delve into the shadows for a moment and check out the only DPS spec that our beloved priests have. Shadow Priest is in a bit of an interesting spot because as far as we know there are changes which we should have seen, but the dev team ran out of time. That's pretty worrying to hear with Battle for Azeroth right around the corner, but that's what we've got to work with until patch 8.1 comes around, where Shadow should see some more changes. I'm really interested to see what could happen because right now Shadow is still fun to play for me, but it has quite a few issues. Maybe it's because I love the theme and the overall Voidverse light battle going on with priests, but what's kind of baffling is that Shadow Priest has changed from a spec which relied very heavily on its dots to a spec which deals more upfront damage with its dots being a secondary concern, just like Balanced Druid really. That means you won't necessarily destroy the meters on multiple targets anymore, but your upfront and burst damage is quite a bit better. Going into BFA, Void Form will still have the same purpose, to increase your damage, but Void Form isn't going to last anywhere near as long. Instead, you'll have lots of little windows instead of a few just really long windows. That means you won't be punished as hard for messing up during Void Form, but you won't have the satisfaction of staying in Void Form for half of the fight. All of these changes might end up hurting Shadow Priest when it comes to raids, but are actually quite beneficial for Dungeons and Mythic Plus. Having your damage windows available more often means you can hop into Void Form on almost every pack, instead of feeling useless for a pack or two while you get yourself back into crazy mode. You can also dish out quite a decent amount of AoE burst damage with the right talents, which has been a lot of fun in the dungeons I've been running. Overall, I would expect Shadow to be a bit weird to play for a while, but ultimately a lot easier than it had been previously, and far less punishing. They should do okay in most encounters, but I don't expect them to shine anywhere in their current state. But if you do decide to go with Shadow Priest, I would try to ignore 8.0 as much as you can, and just hold out for some decent changes in 8.1. Elemental Shamans are more or less in the same boat. There were due changes, but the dev team ran out of time. Check back in patch 8.1, which again is really frustrating to see. Elemental Shamans haven't really changed that much so far, so I'm really curious to see what changes come with 8.1. They'll still be firing off flame shocks to everything they can, lava bursting on cooldown for single target, and spamming lightning bolt or chain lightning depending on how many targets you can hit. That means they're going to carry over their strengths and weaknesses from Legion. They're really good when chain lightning can chain to multiple targets, and they sort of pay for that when it comes to single target. I'll never forget grouping with an Elemental Shaman in Legion. Geared out the wazoo. The first thing he says in chat is, "I'll kill the trash, but I need you guys to kill the bosses." That sums up Elemental Shaman pretty fantastically, which could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you want to get out of your Elemental Shaman. If you enjoyed it throughout Legion, you should be fine. If you didn't, you might want to jump ship until 8.1 rolls around. Maelstrom generation was reduced, so the spec might feel a little slower to play, but Earthshock's Maelstrom cost was also capped out at 60, so you don't have to get max Maelstrom before you can start playing with your hard-hitting abilities. That means your burst as a shaman is a little more accessible, but you're still going to be hammered if you can't use your glorious chain lightning. If you're absolutely desperate to hear my ranking in order, I would say mages are going to be fantastic. You're going to have a strong spec no matter what happens, BM hunters should do very well for themselves, and balanced druids will be up there as well. Warlocks need to hope for some more numbers tuning. They should still be a relatively safe pick, but I don't see them doing quite as well as mages due to their lack of mobility, and it's pretty likely you'll need to swap specs quite often as a warlock. Hunter trails behind warlock, and priests and shamans are just wild cards right now. They could do decently well, but with changes already planned for 8.1, they're just a giant question mark right now. It's all just a guessing game when we know that they're going to get some significant changes when 8.1 rolls around. They could do really well right now and absolutely terrible in 8.1, or vice versa. And that's it for the ranged classes. What spec or class do you think will be on top when you can finally break open the doors to our first raid? Are you planning on playing a ranged DPS at all in BFA? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. If you want to hop on that train, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.